Welcome again to Creating a Strategic Plan, your roadmap to success. My name is Laura Matson, and I am the practice leader for Lancet. I have sort of two responsibilities here for Lancet. I actually have an industry vertical. I specialize in healthcare, but I also have what we consider a horizontal, which means that I help all organizations get started with business intelligence. I'm also joined here by Cindy Alewine, who's going to help us moderate our webinar today. I think we're going to start off with a quick poll question, and this is going to help me understand where everyone is at from this perspective as far as creating strategic plans and that kind of thing. So if you could just take a couple of minutes to answer that poll question, that would be great. We'll bring that up here in a second. All right, the poll is closed. Let's see, where are we at? 57% have never completed a strategic plan, 33% says you're working on one now, and 10% have created one or more. Great, that helps a lot. Thank you, appreciate that. So vast majority of the folks haven't done a strategic plan in the past. Just to give you a little perspective, I've done more than one, and they're just a whole heck of a lot of fun. And we'll talk a lot more about what that means. So in late 2008, I think it was right around November, Gartner released a research note. It wasn't a full research report or anything like that. But the research was really talking about why a lot of BI programs were failing. And what they noted was that many of the BI programs were failing because they didn't plan ahead, or they really lacked a strategic vision associated with their BI program. So that's what this work is all about, right? Creating sort of your framework for how to execute on your BI program overall. And creating sort of an 18-month roadmap, I really would recommend it keeping it to 18 months, maybe 24 at the absolute max, just because business changes a lot and all of our organizations are very dynamic. So it's important to make sure that you stay as dynamic as your organization does. The challenge with doing BI work without that plan, without sort of that strategic framework, and I think why a lot of these were failing and a lot of them continue to fail, is that without a plan you don't really realize that the decisions you're making have a downstream impact until, well, you're downstream. So having that framework, that sort of goal that you have and a plan to get there is really beneficial for your program overall. I like the idea of a roadmap. Obviously, I think it's a conceptual framework that most of us understand, but I really like the idea of a concept of a navigation panel a little bit better. And that navigation panel obviously does things that a roadmap can't do because the roadmap is static. The idea of a navigation panel is that you can avoid road construction or having a bridge out or just traffic delays because of an accident. So if you compare the roadmap against a navigation panel, you know, having that navigation panel concept when you're thinking about doing a roadmap is really beneficial. So all that really means is you don't want to keep that roadmap static. You really want to try to remain as dynamic as possible. So do frequent check-ins with your business, do frequent check-ins with the market outside of your organization, and make sure that you're doing exactly what the organization needs from a strategic direction. So here's a step-by-step process, 10 steps to your next roadmap. Of course, the devil's in the details. And we'll go through each of these details with a little bit more specificity. I think one of the most important things when we're talking about doing this work is that it's very critical to determine who's going to be part of this process, not only from a working group perspective, but also the folks that you plan on interviewing. So you want to make sure that the folks that you are talking about interviewing or are going to be on the work group are the right folks. We'll talk about that a little bit more.
Laura, here's a question that came in. Someone says, we have a pretty small BI deployment and it works really well for us. Do we really need a BI roadmap?
Well, that's a really good question. I think it's interesting that in the last couple of years, BI has went from a sort of only the big kids on the block do it, right, the really large organizations, to being much more embedded in a small to mid-sized market. And so we're all sort of questioning, well, do you really need to do, or what do you really need to do from a BI perspective if you're a really small organization? And I would say that maybe you don't need to do a full-on roadmap, but I really would encourage you to make sure that you have a good framework or a good strategic idea of what you want to deliver in a certain amount of time, in a longer period amount of time, so the 12-month, 18-month sort of time frame. Just because if you don't, you could miss a mark somewhere. So no, you probably don't need to do this really big exercise where you create a roadmap and you interview a whole bunch of people and all of that we'll talk about today, but you do need to do some version of it that will help you make sure that you are executing against a strategic framework. Great question. Okay. So this is, we want to talk about our working group first. I don't know about you guys, but teams are always a lot of fun. I'm that person in the corner there with the dunce cap on. And I think that sometimes it sort of feels like this. The interesting thing to me about this working group is that you will be working a lot with this working group for a pretty intense short amount of time, right? About depending on how large of an effort you're going to do, somewhere between 12 to 14 weeks or 10 to 14 weeks. So you really want to make sure that you pick the right group of people that is a relatively productive group of people that really doesn't require role-playing or prescription medication to be cohesive. This group is different than your BI Council. This group will actually do a lot of the interviews. They'll collect the results. They'll analyze the results, and then they're going to present that the options to the council. You would want to include a leader of the BI group, ideally, a business analyst, and an IT resource. The important thing to remember as you're doing this work, at this phase of the work, as you're creating this team and you're starting to do these initial interviews, is that you're not solutioning. Okay, that's hard for a lot of us to do, but when you're sitting down as a business and you're going through these interviews, you don't want to jump immediately to a solution. You really just want to understand what the business needs and what they're trying to do and what they're doing today to get what they need. So avoid that sort of tricky, slippery slope there. Okay, I think we have another poll question. Great. Well, that's really good news. I'm glad to hear that. That 77% of the folks feel like they definitely know who they would interview when they're thinking about interviewing folks in their organization, and only 23% feel like they probably aren't quite sure yet. So that's good. It's sort of what I expected from that result. We'll talk next a little bit about the interviewees. As with most people that use PowerPoint, I went to ClipArt and I looked lineup. I typed in lineup to see if I could find one. This is the best one I got, but the idea here is that we have your usual suspects. I'm much more funny in person, by the way. So ideally, you find those folks in your organization that have a fair amount of experience and can give you both a perspective of the type of work that they're looking for. So in other words, do they need a dashboard, or do they need somebody that can analyze data, or do they need just a traditional report? And they also understand the level of work that's required to get to the data today. So those folks are usually high-level managers, maybe even directors, depending on your organization. They usually then are managing the group of people that are trying to do all of this work in order to get to the reports. But they also understand or have a perspective on the strategy, so they have that framework, again, that we've been talking about. So that's the group of people that you really want to start with from an interviewee perspective, to be able to get a little bit of a shade of both sides. It's also important at this point to remember that you want to include everyone from a primary functional area that you're going to cover. Okay, you don't want to leave anyone out at this point, because that could mean potentially leaving them out of the first build of your warehouse, or having to sort of redo your roadmap because you realized you forgot finance or something like that. So you want to do sort of a wide swath against your organization. So a good thing to do might be go out, get your org chart, take a look at all those functional leaders across the organization, and work with those folks. Now, you will be interviewing not only this high-level manager group, but also their managers. So again, in your organization, that might mean directors, or it might mean vice presidents, VPs. The VPs will end up giving you a really high-level perspective on what they're looking for. And this group of people, the usual suspects, if you will, are going to give you a little bit more depth. The VPs will end up being on your BI council, and then you'll be presenting back to them just to make sure that what you heard is what they're looking for. So that's the differentiation between those two groups. I think we're going to hit you with one more poll question. This might be the last one. Oops, whoops, sorry. My bad. I put that poll question in the wrong spot. I lied to you. I'm sorry. We'll get that poll question in a minute. So here's the general idea with what we're trying to do with a roadmap or a strategic plan. And I would be a very, very poor business intelligence consultant if I didn't have a pyramid at least once in my PowerPoint presentation here. So here's my pyramid. I just turned it upside down. And what we're looking for is going down from sort of this high-level, very, very high-level strategic vision down to a very finite piece of information. So for us, we're really going from business opportunity, which is what the VPs are going to give you. And just for fun, let's just say that they are going to say something like better reporting and analytics for their customers, competitive differentiator, those kinds of things, right? It's very high level. It's very like, you know, blue sky and butterflies. Really not a lot to give you much information to go from, but it's a good start, right? And it's an important part of the conceptual framework that we need to start on. The next phase is what I term logical processes. We'll talk about those in a little bit. Just as you can imagine, it's just as we're going down this line of detail, we're getting finer and finer perspectives on the needs. Then we have requirements, which is traditional business requirements that we write up in documentation. And then we have components or data components that we actually have to find or use based on those requirements that have been identified. And then that little piece of work that actually has to be done called execution. Okay. So here's where the devil meets the details, right? So we already talked about this idea of a business opportunity. And for our exercise here, we're going to say the business opportunity is improving reporting and analytics for our customers. Then you're going to talk to that VP and say, okay, I need to improve this reporting stuff. Why don't you go talk to my director and find out how to do that? You talk to the director, and the director will usually give you what we term logical processes. So logical processes are things that currently exist or need to exist in order to support the business value. So if you are improving reporting and analytics for clients, you'll want to document every existing report and associated logic for those reports, as well as any reports that need to be created, so any kind of gap that you have. This is an important step because it gives you a sense of volume. Obviously, something like improving reporting and analytics is a pretty broad category. You're probably going to get something a little bit more finite than that, but it's just for just for an example here. But what you want to really get to is a good perspective of all the processes that it would take to improve your reporting and analytics, and you're going to document all of those, and that will give you some volume. Okay. Then once you have, so we have our business opportunity, business value, and the business value is, I skipped over this, I'm sorry, what we're doing here is we're articulating the actual need for the business opportunity. So in other words, if we solve this, what does it provide? So it's just a definition, and that's important once we get away from talking to that VP. We really want to remember and understand what this VP is trying to get to, and we're going to have to remember for a couple of weeks after that. So we wrote in here, ability to provide clients more sophisticated reporting and analysis. Pretty general again, but just for example purposes. Okay. So we talked a little bit about the logical processes, and here we have them identified. Again, I'm in healthcare, so I did a very healthcare specific thing. So ability to report on members by deductible, report on family deductible, claims volume by client, etc. And once we have, oops, sorry about that. Once we have that done, those logical processes, we really have to break that down into consumable business requirements, and that's that next phase there. We have to provide particular sets of both sort of cells from the database, right, like a member ID or a provider ID, as well as any kind of calculation that needs to occur in order to get to any kind of a metric that you're trying to provide on that report. So the idea with the requirements is that it's a document that a developer could pick up and execute against. Okay, so that's different. That's different than the logical processes. They pick that up, they wouldn't have any idea what to do with it. So as you can imagine, those requirements are going to get to be there's a lot of them. Okay, it's not just a simple kind of a couple of pages. There's a fair amount of requirements there.
Laura, we've got some more questions.
Sure.
Is requirements and data components what makes up a roadmap, or is it all four?
So it really is all four. You need all those pieces of information in order to understand, and the reason for that is, again, going back to sort of that strategic framework and that reducing amount of detail associated with it. When you go back to score this, you're going to wrap that up into a higher level category. But in order to time that out based on what you can execute against, you have to know what data components are impacted and what requirements are impacted so that you can get an estimate from your IT partners in order to execute against that. So in other words, you have I'm going to improve reporting and analytics, and you have a series of things that are related to improving reporting and analytics all the way down to impacted data components. And you might find that 50% of the impacted data components you don't have in your data warehouse. So that means that it's a longer runway. It's going to take you longer. So when you're executing or creating that roadmap for approval by your BI Council, you're not going to necessarily choose the thing that's going to require you to get 50% more stuff into your data warehouse the first run out. So that's why you need all of those different levels of detail, both from a prioritization perspective, but also from an estimating perspective. And here we're scoring the requirements again, but what we had to do is get down to those data components, or those smaller pieces of information. And what we're doing here is it's bits and bytes, right? It's binary. 0 means no impact, 1 means impact. So what we're trying to determine here is how complex it would be to deliver something like member ID, and what the impacts are from the information domains for each of those components. So essentially, yes, there's an impact, no, there's not. Okay? And the more impact it is, the more complex it is. You rate that also against your business priority. So you have a complexity score talking about execution from an IT perspective, right? Getting it from the source system, moving it over to your enterprise data warehouse, and that kind of a thing. So that's the complexity score. The business priority score is something that your executives have to help you with. Okay? And those business priorities should be at the higher level. That's where, again, your business opportunity or your logical processes is going to be beneficial, because your executives that are on your BI Council aren't really going to be able to help you with a business priority associated with providing member ID. But if they understand that providing member ID ties directly back to the original business opportunity they said where they wanted to improve reporting and analytics, they can rate how important improving reporting and analytics is. So that's why those two things are really important. So you're going to say, this is how complex it is to deliver this, and the business priority on that is a 5, just for example. And in order to deliver this entire set of requirements, so this is a chunk of work, based on both the business priority and the complexity score, you have a total component score of 281. It's just simple math. And then you compare this set of requirements against all the other sets of requirements that you get during this process. And then it's just a simple, quote-unquote, simple, air quotes, rank order of how things come out, essentially from a components perspective. Now you can use a weighting system if you'd like, and that would be completely acceptable. So in other words, we really have to do reporting and analytics first. We have to improve that, no questions asked, right? So you can weight that business priority so that it doesn't really matter how complex it is. We know that that one ranks ahead of everything else. So here we are. So let's talk about a couple of different ways that you can present these results. So sort of going back, you've interviewed your VPs, you've interviewed your directors, you've gotten all of your business opportunities, documented all your logical processes, you've documented the requirements associated with those, you've found the components associated with those, you've scored all of those, and you've rank ordered those. And so now what you have is a list of projects that are in rank order of importance. And you have two ways of presenting this to your council. So the first way is that upper left-hand sort of quadrant view. And this is nice because you look at it and you immediately know what projects are green light, go, and what projects are in the red. And you can get a fair amount of detail associated with that. The interesting thing is it doesn't really help you with timelines at all. So the one that is a little bit more of a traditional roadmap view is the one in the lower right-hand side there, and that's exactly what it looks like. Here's a chunk of work that we're going to do in a specific amount of time. The little pictures there show that it's either a report or a dashboard, that kind of thing. Now, neither one of these is sufficient enough for project management, but the intention for both of these is really about communicating out to your business users of what you're trying to execute against. So your project plan will look very different, and that's a completely different webinar. But these are the two sort of visualizations that I've seen associated with roadmaps. And you can use both. You don't have to use one exclusively. So besides the two visualizations, or one visualization, depending on how you decide to do it, there are a couple other deliverables that are associated with your roadmap. Now, keeping in mind that the roadmap document, when you are complete with it, when it's all done, it's not just those visualizations, but all the supporting documentation associated with it. So all of the interviews that you've done, all the requirements that you've written, all of that is part of your roadmap document. These documents get really, really long. I think the smallest one I've ever written is like 120 pages, so they're very long.
Laura, here's a question that just came in. Where does the communication plan fit in the overall roadmap process?
The first thing that you want to do from a communication plan, so let me back up here. We don't have a traditional communication plan embedded in the roadmap itself. So by definition, sort of, you are communicating out as you're creating these interviews or doing these interviews. So one of the important things that you want people to understand while you're interviewing them is the process for what you're doing and what you're going through, and the timelines associated with it that you're comfortable giving them, right? So I'm a VP. This is sort of a completely new process to me, and you're going to explain that this is what you're doing with the process, this is the timelines associated with it, and here's when they can expect to see the deliverable. Obviously, your BI council, this group that will review the roadmap and approve it, communication to those folks is very different, right? That's more of a status report of this week we've completed this many interviews and we're, X% done to completion, that type of a thing. When you get your roadmap approved and you start looking at communicating out to your end users, so everybody that could potentially use your BI program, that really would be more about how to market your BI program than it is about the roadmap itself. Because you don't want to talk just about all of the projects associated with the roadmap, but you want to talk about the end game, sort of the BI program that's going to be created as a result of executing against all these projects. So that's really about marketing your program as a whole. Okay. Hope that answered your question. So back to a couple of documents here that we'll provide as part of this roadmap exercise. One is a needs assessment analysis. So this is a Word document kind of a thing. and it's designed to capture, validate, and synthesize those user requirements. It has the set of prioritized business drivers for the information, so again, that's the business opportunities. It's got the logical processes in there. It's got all the data requirements. We also indicate data availability and quality assessment. So the quality assessment you might not be able to get to in a lot of depth. It's not like we're going to do a complete data profiling exercise here, but what you want to do is communicate what you know about the quality associated with these data. So the data is available and there may be gaps. Stratified BI functionality requirements, all that really means is these are sort of sweeping statements about the functionality you're going to provide from a business intelligence perspective. So again, improving reporting and analytics. And you definitely want to include security and history requirements because they can have pretty big implications from a foundational perspective for your program overall. So if you work in an industry like healthcare where we're dealing with a lot of security needs and a lot of potential need for archiving data over time, that can have a really big impact. So you want to make sure that you document some of those non-functional requirements as you're doing this work. So the roadmap as a whole, from a deliverables perspective, is a detailed narrative document, and it's got the methods, the findings, and the recommendations associated with the quote-unquote master plan initiative. So it should have a project overview, sort of an executive summary kind of a thing. You want to talk about your current state, any kind of future state or recommended long-term architecture things that you want to address. You definitely want to address the technology scope and capacity requirements. So that can mean anything from you need tools to you need a lot more hardware for the history requirements, that kind of a thing. You want to address organization and process considerations. Maybe there's not a big organizational impact to you, maybe there is. And you can't solve for that in the roadmap. That's not the idea of the roadmap. But what you want to make sure people understand is that over time, as we start to execute these projects through this roadmap exercise, there will likely be implications for your organization in order to do things in the most efficient way. So that includes organization and process considerations, things like data stewardship and governance, IT development and user support, training. And then you definitely have, obviously, the most specific important thing about it is the identification and explanation of project facing, which is actually the roadmap as a part of the deliverable. So you can just take a couple of seconds to answer this for me. All right. So 5% of you said no, that you're not going to do a roadmap, so I scared you. I've sufficiently scared off some of you. 32% said maybe, 47% said yes in the near future, and 16% said yes within the next year. So great. Sort of interested about those folks that said no. Maybe you're just here to listen. So like I said earlier, I've done a number of these over the years, and all of them have been a little bit different and a little bit interesting. But they're really, you're going to learn an awful lot about your organization. Let's just put it that way. Okay. So, of course, this is a webinar, so I have the obligatory pitch for Lancet. This is the best part, in my opinion, but you know, I guess you can decide for yourself. So here at Lancet, we have something called the 5 disciplines, and this is our framework for all of our business intelligence projects. And the idea here is we really see BI as a set of disciplines. It's not just one thing or even 2 things. And these 5 disciplines is based on years of trial and error, sort of trying to execute in a business intelligence environment. Integration discipline. It's our 5th discipline out of all of them, and that's not to imply that it's the last one you consider. It's just the last one we wrote about, I guess.
All right. A couple questions came in.
Sure.
When do you normally start the roadmap in relation to the beginning of an implementation?
Well, that's a really good question, actually, because I guess the easy answer would be, geez, you should do it right away, but that's not necessarily the case. it's sort of like buying a new recliner, right? You buy it, it's pretty, it fits into your decor, but it's not broken in yet. So you want to sit in it and get comfortable for a while. And that might be true for your BI, for your BI program. So I don't know that it has to happen right away. You definitely want to take a lay of the land and see where your organization is at. If you have a BI program up and running that's been running without a strategic roadmap or a strategic plan or a roadmap, you probably have a little bit longer runway to check, to get that recliner sort of broken in. If it's a new BI program and you just took over and you sort of have this green field, your runway probably isn't nearly as long because you need to execute, right? You need to deliver something. So those are sort of the two things you want to think about. Obviously, I'm not sure where you're at on that, but if you have something that's up and running already, I would take a little bit longer time to get the lay of the land, understand what the implications are, see if anybody's ever tried to do this before, that kind of a thing, and then really scope out your plan of how you want to execute that work. If it's brand new, greenfield, this is the first time your organization has ever done it, then you probably need to get started sooner rather than later. Okay, hope that helps you.
Another question. A roadmap is great, but I've been part of a lot of these projects, and the part that is always missing is how you actually execute against it. Do you have any tried and true techniques for closing that gap?
So absolutely, you're right. The hardest part is the devil is in the details, right? And I think we probably all know of situations where you created a roadmap or some kind of a deliverable like that, and for some reason or another, it sort of fails. So my best advice is don't pick the hardest thing first. Try to pick something that's relatively achievable but will deliver a fair amount of business value. Keeping in mind that for most of us in this situation, your team is going to be coming together for the very first time around this roadmap exercise, and that first phase of work is going to be the first time that your team has worked together. So it goes back to that forming, storming, norming kind of a thing. So pick something that's relatively easy in the beginning, and it's going to get you a lot of bang for your buck, or as much bang for your buck as you can. Get it under your belt, make sure the team has worked pretty well together, and then try something that's a little bit more complicated to achieve. But the most important thing is you keep up as much momentum as possible and deliver as much value to the business users as possible. So here's a little bit more about our 5 disciplines framework. We have this concept of project execution, which is just good old-fashioned project management. And these projects are appropriate to your BI roadmap. So obviously a BI program is a series of projects. We have operations and service level management discipline. Those are data quality things, service level agreements, capacity planning, performance tuning, those types of things. Obviously, we have program management functions within these disciplines, the budgeting, client relationship management, skills development, demand generation. This is where your organizational design, recruiting, and staffing comes in. We have architecture and technology. This is exactly what it sounds like, right? Your data warehousing architecture, solution architecture, that kind of thing. And then the final one that we've been talking about today is this business integration. So strategic planning, facilitation of stewardship, project and program steering committees, all those good, happy things where you're integrating with your business, assuming you're in an IT role. So those are our 5 disciplines. Roadmaps are really a personal thing, and it really is your organization, and the roadmap has to be your deliverable. It can't be a consultant's deliverable because it loses a little bit of its punch, if you will. So I can come in as a consultant, gee, I've done this before, aren't I really special? And I can give you that roadmap, but that roadmap isn't yours then, right? You didn't create it, you didn't own it. There's a part of that ownership that resides with the consultant. So I'm always, I'm pitching my services, but I'm really not. But I think you really need to be a little bit careful about that, right? And that's one of my personal beliefs is from a roadmap perspective, you need to own this work, and you need to make sure that it's exactly what represents your organization, not the consultant's organization. That doesn't mean that you couldn't use a little help. Everybody needs help sometimes, right? So you could certainly rely on Lance's experience in guiding your organization through the strategic planning. So here's a couple of options. First, call for help. I don't have like a 911 call set up or anything like that, although my cell phone's on all the time. But this is sort of the idea where you just get weekly check-in calls, and they're really just calls, and we talk once a week or twice a week or once every other week, and I sort of guide you through this process and help you avoid the obstacles or some of those road constructions or the bridges out kind of issues that come up during these road mapping processes. Really helpful if you've never done a roadmap process before, or maybe have done one but aren't quite sure how to navigate through some of these things. So that's a very nice support. It's really much more of a support function, right? Then we have the Train the Trainer. So I've created a 2-day training program, and we'll teach you everything you need to know about how to complete the roadmap. So we've just spent 35 minutes reviewing this at a really, really high level, right? I sort of walked you through it in a pretty short amount of time. You'll probably have a million questions as to how you actually execute against that. This 2-day training program can address that for you. Everything you need to know, including some documentations and interview tips. And then, of course, there's always the we'll come in and help you do it. It's not always 14 weeks. That's on the high end. It could be less than that depending on how large your organization is. But the idea, again, is we're going to work hand in hand with you so that the deliverable is really yours, not mine. But you know as much about that process, and you're going to know more about your organization so that when Lancet leaves, you're going to be able to do that again, because the idea of this roadmap is it has to be dynamic. It can't be static. So every 6 months you need to check in to make sure you're doing exactly what the business has asked you to do. So that's my pitch. I will now officially leave you alone. But I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And I hope this was helpful to you. You can contact me anytime at the phone number there or the email. And if you're interested, you can check me out on Twitter. I tweet, therefore I am. And very rarely do I tweet anything interesting, but sometimes I'm funny. I am the co-host on the BI Network's Healthcare channel with a gentleman named Scott Wormless. I blog on, who doesn't blog? I blog, therefore I am, I guess. Blog.lancetsoftware.com. I've also created a little bit of an experiment that I'm doing, a collaboration site or an online business intelligence community, a safe place where we can all talk about what we're doing. You can email me for details if you're interested in that. Really, it's just a bunch of people that are doing business intelligence at different phases of maturity levels, and we're all asking each other questions, and I provide content out there, so there's a lot of my PowerPoint decks are out there and that kind of thing. And I'm hoping that that will pick up activity a little bit. And I'm still planning my World Domination Tour for 2011. I think I'll be in Poughkeepsie and spend some time in probably Louisiana. So it's sort of a joke. I'm really not going on a World Domination Tour. I'm sure you're all laughing. All right.
Yeah, one more question here. We are a very project-based organization. How do you align that structure with a roadmap exercise?
Good question, and I think a lot of folks are very project-oriented. And really what we're talking about there is when you are breaking out your roadmap into that consumable pieces of work. If your organization is very project management focused and usually your executives don't approve anything outside of a project, then what you want to do is highlight the idea that the program is 6 different projects, or this iteration, this first phase we're going to do is going to be 4 months long and it's going to include 2 projects. So that's really what you want to do on that. If it would help you to create project plans, so actually using Microsoft Project to create little project plans. That would be really beneficial, again, kind of keeping in the conceptual framework of your organization. All right, well, thank you, everyone, for your time today. And if you ever need anything, feel free to just drop me a note.